Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to what is a very unique event. This is Chatterbox Live. Now, this is the first time we've done this particular event in this format for parents. We've had a couple of goes at doing this before, once with a senior group of students, another one with a junior group of students at two different locations, but this is the first time, I don't know whether we've ever say we've been brave enough, but to be able to do a live stream Q&A with parents. We think it's really important to be able to do this, and it's a great opportunity, I hope, for those that are here, but also for those that are viewing online, to ask some questions of the Executive Director about things that are important to you and you know that are important to your parents. So thank you for being here, and thank you for all of those that are watching online through the Facebook Live feed. Particularly want to introduce to you our MC for tonight. You'll see a couple of people behind me, and I'll move out of your way so you can see them more fully in just a second. Our MC tonight is Mark O'Connor, and Mark is here to my right. I've actually known Mark for a little while now. Mark was, in fact, is a teacher in our system at Emmaus College, but his children go to this school as well. Mark was also, you'd hate me telling you this, but Mark was also voted the award of the Australian Teacher of the Year in 2012. That award presented to him by the then Prime Minister Julia Gillard. At a particularly significant ceremony. So we're really fortunate to have Mark here as our MC this evening. So I'm going to hand you over to Mark, again to welcome you all. Delighted that you're here, and to those that are watching elsewhere, thank you very much for being with us. Thank you, Mark.
All right, thank you. Yeah, Mark's really right. It's very embarrassing that he mentioned that. It was a long time ago. Very, very good day for my family and I, and something I genuinely remember with fond memories. But we're here really today to speak with Greg Whitby, the Executive Director of Schools in Parramatta CEO, and a really passionate educator, someone who's written quite widely about education and really given a vision of a different type of school and a different way of schooling. So it'll be really interesting today for us to have an opportunity to get Greg's insights into exactly what school's about, and we've got some questions that are going to come through from our live feed, and we've got some questions later on from the live audience here in front of us tonight. So we'll start with the question from Judy. First of all, welcome, Greg. Do you want to say hi?
Good to be here.
Yep.
I'm very nervous, I'll tell you.
I've seen some of the questions. You should be nervous.
But I can tell you, if you're half as honest as the students were, I'm in deep trouble.
We'll see if we can get you through it, Mr. Whitby. Here we go. So Judy has asked you this question. Mr. Whitby, you've set a vision for Catholic schools in today's world. What happens to that vision when you retire from education?
Well, I've just taken a new 5-year contract, so maybe I've got some time up my sleeve. But the reality is that it's not my vision. I mean, it's lovely that people might think it is, but most people are probably not interested in my vision or what I think. What I do know is that the world has changed, and we owe it to our kids to get the best possible education we can give them in today's world. Things have changed since I went to school, and the whole array of technologies and tools that we have at our disposal allows us to really do something different. Why should education be the only industry that doesn't change? If you think about the industries that you deal with, or the doctor's surgery, the dentist surgery you go to, they are so different than the ones that I went to. The skill sets are required, and the tools that then can make your experience as a dentist actually bearable these days. So what happens is, my job is really just to challenge and ask the schools to respond to that challenge. So the answer to the vision question lies in each and every one of our school communities. I don't do any teaching. I'm not a principal of a school, so I can't do that. But my responsibility to the Catholic community and the work I do on behalf of the Bishop is to ensure that we're doing the very best we can in responding to the changing nature of the world in which we live, so that we can equip our young people to be agents of change, saints for the world, and constructive being able to contribute to a world that's no longer mine.
And I think the great thing when Greg responds like that is that our young people have so much potential. I'm sure you'd agree with me, Greg. Working in schools, you see the unbelievable opportunities we have with the young people that are in our care. Our next question is from Joseph, and his question is, what are the benefits of having students learn in agile spaces? How do teachers prevent students from becoming distracted, especially those with additional learning needs?
They don't need to do anything that good teachers have always done. I mean, I remember sitting in rows and staring out the window. It wasn't because we had the space necessarily. The issue and the answer to that question lies in good teaching and good teaching practice. The agile spaces, again, are just a response to the theory and practice. We do know what the theory and practice tells us about contemporary learning and teaching. We talk about personalising the learning, starting from where the child is at and then building the education experience around the child. That requires teachers to work collaboratively together. So they need to be able to access their colleagues when they need them, where they need them, share their experience, ask questions. It's called professional learning. And you need to do it at the point of impact is when the learning's taking place. So immediately that says, well, you need to be able to meet and do those sort of things. So the spaces have started to open up. There is no formula in these spaces. We don't have a formula that we roll out. We are challenging the staff and the school communities to meet the needs of young people in today's world so that they learn how to collaborate, communicate, be creative, innovative, all those sorts of things that we know they're going to require into the future. We want them to be confident and articulate that they can understand their learning and they do know how to take responsibility for their learning. And we need to understand that the staff need to be the best they can possibly be, and that is about a continuous learning program. So when you put that agenda on the table and say to you, well, what space would you like? Then that's how we're getting these responses. And across all our schools, you'll see some very, very different approaches. It's a simplistic thing to say, but you could be sitting under a tree or in a very small classroom. I've been in some very tiny classrooms. The ultimate difference is made by good teachers teaching, not about the spaces. The space is only an enabler. I often say this, if you give a great hammer to a poor carpenter, you're unlikely to get a better outcome. But if you give a carpenter the best possible hammer, you'll get the best result. And that's what we're saying here. And it's not, as I said in answer to the previous question, it's not my job to do it because we have staff who can do it. If I want to do it, I'll have to go and work in a school and be part of that school community as they respond. We don't have a one-size-fits-all. The problem with our existing industrial model, we have one-size-fits-all. You either fit in or you've got to move out. And everybody's treated the same. In the way we approach it, we start from the individual person and build it out because we recognise diversity as the norm.
All right, so Greg, our next question...
Did I answer that about the kids with special needs?
Yeah, maybe like the second part of the question was around students who have additional learning needs in those spaces.
And this is one of the great wins that we find with this, because in these spaces now where we've got teachers working collaboratively, working together, we ask that every adult take responsibility for every child. You're no longer in this business by yourself. Why should you be presented with the only problem with the child you can't deal with? So we have a arrangement so that we can support the teacher and wrap the support that the teachers might need around the child themselves, rather than just palming them off or taking them out to a special ed class or a whole withdrawal class. We don't have those in our system because we deal with them in situ, in context. And it's probably the best feedback I get, and the thanks from our parent communities who have kids, as one parent said to me, "Thank God my son comes home and thinks he goes to a normal school." So, we could go into the whole structure of it, but that's how we deal with it.
I think too, when you're looking at children who have different needs, I think Greg's right. If you go back to a traditional classroom, they still had needs. Whether they were in a traditional or an open space, those needs are still the same. It's a bit like, I think one thing we've learned in teaching a lot in this generation is that we used to teach things and believe it was taught, but now we actually really ask, did they learn? So just teaching is not enough. We really want to know, does the kid actually understand what's happening? So I think there's been some real shifts in the way that we think about education, and the spaces make us think more, which in the end is exactly what Greg's trying to say about the challenge to us as teachers. The next question is from Diana around homework. So she's asking the question about why certain Catholic schools don't assign homework. And she's, I think, suggesting that maybe from at least year 4 that they should have some homework.
again, a very simple but powerful question. I don't know the answer to it, why some Catholic one schools do. I don't know what they actually do, but I'm not surprised that some do and some don't. But if you think about homework is an artefact of the industrial model of school. You've got 6 hours at school, so you set some extra work, and they do it at home, and then come back, and it's either revision or extra work. The reality is, I remember as a parent myself, I did half the homework or 3/4 of the homework. I gave up after my son got to year 6 maths. By then it had passed me by. It was much too complex. But I spent a lot of hours doing the homework. So I'm actually doing the teacher, and I'm the wrong person. Well, I shouldn't have said that, should I? Having been a teacher. I'm perhaps the wrong person because my son was too close to me to be his teacher, is what I meant. The way that many schools are responding to this is to see this as a continuum of learning and ask the kids to be involved in what they need to know and how they need to know that. We have a range of options you may have heard in the senior schools about talking about flipping the classroom so that they're set extra work to do and then deal with it when they come back into school. That's one way of dealing with it. But increasingly we're finding that by structuring the learning around what we call experiential learning and driven by an inquiry cycle, I'm sorry to give you some jargon, but what that means is that we engage the kids in rich and challenging tasks, get them to work in teams, everybody takes responsibility for certain parts, and everybody has a go at doing those sorts of things, and they design the length of the project, and they choose to work when they work and how they want to work. If you just think at the moment about the secondary environment, most of our kids are online and doing schoolwork anyway, so they're actually working in different hours. Why should we assume that 1 hour extra of doing this is going to be the answer to improving the kids' learning outcomes? So again, it's in probably a state of transition. Some people like the idea that some formal work. My advice to parents around this is always the best thing you can do is read, or get the child to read, and read with the child is probably the best homework, or talk to them about their reflection of schooling.
So probably a question that sort of goes back to a different time as well is about learning the sacraments. And Helen wants to know, are we ever going to go back to learning the sacraments in school hours rather than doing it in our parish?
I should get Father Ron to answer this one. Look, there are cycles. For those of us who've been around a long time, sacraments at various times have been done in the school. Then they went back into parishes, back into schools. I forget where we are on the cycle. They're back in the parishes, but there is a sense, and supported by schools. So generally, that's the answer to the question. But the real answer to the question is they are taught in schools. They're part of our RE curriculum. And any RE curriculum that avoids the sacraments, or as I was talking to somebody about today in another interview, they said, well, you know, when will you think Catholic schools stop being Catholic? And I said, well, when Jesus goes missing. I mean, that's the defining nature of our Catholic schools is that encounter with Jesus and the incarnation. But in the RE curriculum, I know that they do cover the sacraments.
So Sharon's question is really a now question. So mobile phones are a reality of the world we live in. They're a huge distraction for high school age students. In your leadership with the CEDP, will you ever consider implementing a sort of diocesan-wide policy around mobile phones and handing them in at the start of the lesson?
I've been very public on this one. The answer simply is no. Again, schools know how to deal with these things. It's a school-based decision. It is wrong for me to make arbitrary decisions and say this is your practice and you shall do this. All I want to say about phones is the last thing that a mobile phone is now is a phone. Right? So the phone has become such a small part of what this thing actually is. It's a powerful learning device. So the starting point is this. Turned off, it's just wires and plastic. Right? Turned on, it can be a really powerful tool to equip teachers in school. So why should we deny that? The second thing is the world in which they live. They spend 18 hours a day with these things and working at home, and then we bring them to school and say, hang on, that's not the world of school. No wonder they think we're strange. And I guarantee amongst the parents here and the parents out listening to this, there are parents who have rules. Do you have rules sometimes about how you use the phones in schools? That's what schools do. They have rules. So you don't blame the tool. Again, going back to our carpenter, if you smash the wall with your hammer, you don't say, we'll ban hammers. You do something about the carpenter to make sure that he knows how to use it properly. And that's what we're trying to do. If we don't teach them, when they first invented cars and there were no roads, somebody used to have to walk in front with a red flag till we worked out that you need rules. We'll drive on the left side of the road. And there are even sanctions around that. Now, I'm not saying we need the sanctions. However, to really put it bluntly, if children are being distracted from learning, it's the teacher's role to make sure that they're not distracted. So that's where the answer lies. And I'm not passing the buck, because one thing I do know, we think this is great technology. In 5 years' time, we're going to be laughing about this device because it's going to be a very different device.
Yeah, I'd echo what Greg's saying. I know in my own class the other day I was doing an explanation of how to write a certain aspect of a response, and I had 2 kids who weren't there. And quickly 3 kids got out their phone, recorded me explaining it, and now they've given that to the other students who are absent. So there are some really good ways of using mobile phones in education, and the distraction side of things is a very accurate statement as well. But like anything, swinging on a chair is really irritating as well, or chewing gum's really irritating, but you just simply ask the student not to do it. Now, that doesn't always happen, but Greg's right. Every school would have a process around how they would then deal with that situation if the student doesn't listen straight away. So it's probably no different, but it does still have some amazing capabilities for us to use in education. We're up to the exciting part of the evening now, because we're going to throw over to our audience who are actually here in front of us. And I think Mark's going to go around and grab your questions. So if anyone has a question that they'd like to ask Greg, straight away. Introduce yourself first.
Hi, I'm Melissa. I have 2 boys and a girl, and I'm concerned about the education of the boys in our system. I think there's a lack of competition. And marks given. We need marks because boys like competition and they actually thrive by that. I think we are being disrespectful to our boys, and we have these 20-year-olds lost.
I take the question at face value. I don't know what you mean by lost, but the argument about competition driving education has been debunked quite thoroughly. And I go back to what I said very much at the beginning. The world belongs to the collaborators, the ones that can share and the ones who can learn continuously. To assume that needs to be a competitive way to drive improvement. I think there's enough examples to show one of the highest problems we face in our schools is well-being. And how does that come about? Because just take NAPLAN, for example. The world goes into meltdown around NAPLAN. We have parents on the phone, parents complaining, all because we've bought into this fallacy that somehow NAPLAN tells you how good you are, how intelligent you are, and what's the best school. Not only that, parents are paying extra, hundreds of dollars to have coaching. You go into any post office and buy a book. You can do NAPLAN for Dummies now. So we're fostering a whole industry based on the simple fallacy that competition drives good learning. Now, the theory and the practice would tell you that doesn't happen. The issue of marks and all those sorts of is a part. I agree with you. What you're asking is, how will we know your child is doing the best they possibly can, and how are we remediating or assisting that when we do know how they're doing? That's the discussion that we need to have. And what we're finding, and I can go back to the use of technologies that help us do this, we're getting much richer data in a whole range of areas about student performance and student achievement than you'll ever get out of the competition about marks. Even if you buy into the fact that competition is good, the issue is what happens around the improvement. And when you have the test, you have to wait till the test's marked, then the test comes back, then that moment of the learning has moved. When you're actually with children and you can capture the learning and talk about the learning, you're going to get a much richer outcome. I'm not saying that there's not a problem per se with competition and asking kids to challenge themselves, but I think it's a flawed premise to assume that competition drives improvement. The issue of boys' education, I'm often asked this. Our response in the Parramatta Diocese is we have boys' schools, we have girls' schools, we have comprehensive schools. We're trying to offer parents choice because there's no one answer that would say that the jury's out on this. You can read whichever literature you'd like. It says that there's no answer, whether boys are better by themselves, girls are better by themselves, or co-ed, or even moving, having sort of half and half, and changing the structure. The answer to that proposition comes back to good teaching, I believe.
All right, Mark's going to find us another question from the audience.
Hello, Lynn McKinnon, parent. Since publishing your book quite a few years ago, Educating for the Gen Wi-Fi, I'd like you to put your futuristic hat on. And as a futurist, because I do see you as a bit of a futurist, would you be able to think, we're talking about the Agile learning and you're talking about the research with the competition and we know that we've had inquiries now into our curriculum. As a futurist, what do you think will be the future issues in 21st century learning, like beyond where we are now? And as a parent, and you're a parent yourself, what tools do you think we as parents could have to equip ourselves with the future issues into 21st century learning?
I'm not telling anyone because I'm going to make $1 million with that answer. Thanks, Lynn. Very good. I have no better crystal ball than any one of you have, but what my experience tells me, and I can tell you this, the fastest growing area of schooling across the globe is homeschooling. The disengagement of young people from learning globally is up around the 70 to 80%, depending on the figures, right? And that doesn't matter, even if you're in Finland or Singapore and Hong Kong, it's all the same. That's telling us something. The issue around the homeschooling is, I hope I'm not going to insult anyone here, but when that first started, people used to say, "Oh, they're pretty weird, really. Fancy keeping them home, the poor child." What's happened now? Those homes are now networking. They're using technologies. They're building their own systems. The third proposition is you can go on the net now and get any maths curriculum that you want, when you want it, where you want it, in a form you want it. And it's the same with every other subject we teach. You want to get a credential in machine learning for a reputable university, you can go to Harvard Ed, sign up and do a course online, and it's free. They will, what we call micro-credential your course, and you can add it to a whole range of courses and you can graduate with a specific degree. All that's telling me something about the school and the stranglehold that schools have on the business of schooling. I was speaking at another event about digital technology last week, and I wanted to be provocative, and I said, if we don't do something soon, in 10 years we won't have schools as we know them, because nobody will be coming to them. And why would you when you can get those sorts of opportunities? And that's the challenge we face, is about this relevance, which takes us back to the fact that we need to modernise the experience. And I'd use the modernise very deliberately. We have an archaic model that was designed to suit a factory model where you needed to get kids through a sausage machine And I went through that myself. I just went straight through, and then I came out, went to university, etc. And I thought I'd have a job for life and all that. All that's, my children live in a very different world than that. That's foreign to them. And I did it debt-free. They all carry massive HECS burdens. Right? So, Lynn, my answer is how do we address those things? The core of my role as Executive Director falls in two parts: evangelisation and strategic positioning. That's my requirement. Strategic positioning requires me to actually try to answer that question. So my question, and the question I'm always asking our teams in the office is, where will we need to be in the next 5 or 10 years? We can't just sit back and say more of the same. You know, the whole issue of the school improvement agenda, I may as well put this on the table now. You've really got me wound up. It's a con job, and politicians are the worst at it. So when we got NAPLAN, when it first started, it was a basic skills test administered to give material to teachers. It worked really well. The parents liked it, the teachers liked it, the kids liked it, and it was making some real differences. So then we decided we need a national test, and so it was brought in years 3 to 5. So politicians jump up and down and say, nothing's changing, we're getting worse, Finland's better than us, you know, even Uzbekistan did better than us a certain stage, so we need to change. So what do? We'll add more tests. Well, that's a good strategy. Look where the 2 tests got us. So you want to add more. So we've now got 5 of them. Okay, so we've exhausted the fact that we've tested the kids to death, and we've still got no improvement. So what do we do now? Let's test the teachers. Let's lift the entry mark into university. Right? All those sorts of things that actually have led to no improvement. I would be a full supporter of those if they had changed. I can tell you within 1 or 2 schools who will be the top 10 schools in the high school student in New South Wales this year. How do I know that? Because they're the same every year. They're the same every year. You don't even need to do the test. You may as well just give it, well, you're it, off you go. So that's the issue, how we position ourselves to be responsive to those changes. And I don't have the answer. In 5 years' time, I won't need to worry about it. But you know, while I'm here for this 5 years, I'm going to do my very best to make sure that this system, as it is as responsive as it can be in doing the job we've been asked to do, and that's the evangelisation part, which is the good news for all.
I'll give one thing to you, Lynn. Greg would be aware that I'm currently teaching a class. Gavin Hayes came up with this idea from CEO where I'm teaching at Emmaus, so that's my day. I go to work and teach at Emmaus. I go home. I put some funky sort of headphones on and a bit of a microphone, and I teach 2 kids at St. Paul's at Greystanes, and I teach a kid at St. Clair's. And I have met those kids twice. So my teaching is all online. I'm running my course through like video conferencing. I can share my work with them like they can see my screen, so I can teach them through that. And early days, we're only 2 terms into this sort of project, and it's a new idea from the CEDP. But it sort of shows the responsive nature of our diocese to trying different things and being a little bit experimental. Honestly, it doesn't sound revolutionary, but in terms of education, it's pretty revolutionary. I don't know that it's happening in too many dioceses.
I apologise. I should have mentioned we've established our virtual school. So thanks for reminding me. I do disagree with Mark on one thing. It's not experimental. I'm accused of a lot of things, and one of them that really gets up my nose is that we're experimenting. Some of you may have heard Mark Latham and Alan Jones have been, making comments about. Sorry?
They say good things.
Have been,
don't you dare. Alan Jones and Mark Latham say good things.
Have been saying a range of things about the schools that the facts don't bear out, and I'm prepared to defend that proposition. But the one thing is, this is not an experiment. I will never experiment on young people. We will do the best we know about theory and practice. Now that involves change and involves stretch. But there's not one of you sitting in this room that hasn't, in the course of the last 20 years, had to change and learn to do something differently. And how we do that, and even as a democracy, we're struggling with how to do it. But it's not an experiment. Voting's not an experiment. If you take the metaphor forward, we've got a lot of problems with the voting things that people all talking about, well, we've got to learn to do it better. But voting's not an experiment. And the learning and teaching is not an experiment. We'll do the very best with good theory and practice, and we'll do it despite of the people who throw bricks uneducated about what we do.
All right, we might take one more from the audience before we move back to the online questions.
Hi, my name's Kimberly. Thanks for having me here tonight. I believe that there could be more sensitivity to step families. I'm finding that blended families are becoming quite the norm, and I've got some statistics here as well. According to 2016 Australian Bureau of Statistics, 30% of first marriages end up in divorce, and up to 60% of second marriages also go through divorce. So a child going to school could actually be living through a double trauma: the breakdown of the first marriage, then going through the second marriage, having a new step family, and then the breakdown of the second marriage. And I don't want to come across as grim, but these kids are going to school and they've got the iceberg effect, the little, they've just got the iceberg effect, and it's just got that domino effect as well. So I have experience being a stepmother, and I can see a lot of gaps within the system. And one example is that I attended a school meeting and went through a lot of humiliation by the stepchild being asked while the meeting had been started, is there anyone in the room who doesn't want to be there? And that was quite damaging to my family. And I believe it's just the small changes that can be made to make a difference within a step family or a blended family, because it is very different from a nuclear family. So I'm just wondering, is there any projects being undertaken to be able to be more step family friendly as well? Thank you.
Look, I'm not aware that we have any program per se, but we have our student wellbeing, our student welfare group deal with these issues, and they deal with them again on a school by school basis. And I acknowledge that sometimes we do it very poorly. In the broader answer to your question is, we've built 2 new schools in the last 3 years, and it comes to this issue of meeting families where they're at, not just saying putting a building up on the hill and there it is and you come to it. St Luke's and Santa Sophia they're opened at 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. We enrol the students from age 3, and we have out of school hours care for the students. And that's recognition of that whole diversity. One of the things, when you've got a blended family and you've got kids to go somewhere else and then pick-ups and all those sorts of things, we've tried to bring it all together. And it's been very successful. They're very well subscribed, and all our schools from now on will be in what we call that pre to post model, continuing to try and stretch to be responsive to the communities we serve. If you think of any business, any organisation, just take banks for example, in terms of when at least a decade ago, not more than a decade ago, the banks drove the customer experience. So what that meant is, if you want money, you had to go and put your book over, they had to stamp it, they give it to you, and it was only open at certain times. If you missed out, you got no money. No such thing as holes in walls and that sort of thing. Now, what's a bank? Your banking experience is totally gone. You rarely go into a bank. And schools are stuck in that. Every other industry, the Apple Music has changed the record industry because people want it where they want it, how they want it, when they want it, in what form, and they want it the way they want to do it. There's no one way to do that. So schools are going to be challenged the same sort of thing. So why do you just have to come to the school? This is the way we do it, and if you don't like it, well, bad luck, you don't come to the school. That's a very big shift in mindset. So outside of all the other things we do to work with those families.
I see that everywhere. And then on top of that, you have children that generally, through that trauma, have had hassles at school, whether dyslexia comes to the surface. There's lots of issues that come through that trauma. But my question is, what are you doing to support the teachers? Because teachers now aren't just teaching maths and English. They have to be counsellors, they have to be psychologists, they have to be security guards in the playground. So my fear is, the teachers out there, I know a lot of teachers, and a lot of them are getting sick purely because of the stress they are now under and the expectations from parents, but also from higher up of the, you get pressure from the top as well. And I just want to know what support there is.
Look, another great question. The very simple version is the way we structure our schooling across the provision of schooling is in two parts. If you think of them as just two circles intersecting, one part is the learning, the other one is enterprise, what we call enterprise, which is the business side of schooling. And in the centre, the intersection is, and we've just had a meeting recently with all our principals and senior staff, as that's where we discuss the strategy, if you like. So everybody who's involved has a voice at the table. So we had that on Tuesday or Wednesday, whatever the day is, I've forgotten. That doesn't matter. But what that aims to do, we're trying to take everything that gets in the way of teachers' work out and we do it. Automation is a very big part of that. We've automated a whole range of our processes, our technology, our finances. We've changed all the billing things to things that schools used to be very busy with. And over the next 2 years, we have a program of finalising that. We're in the process of making determinations about a range of tools to support teachers so that when they just walk into space, their roles will be delivered to them. The marking can be done, everything on their mobile phone when they want to do it. Arrange meetings, review kids' work, all those sorts of things that get in their way. And our principals, we have building plans to support the principals so they don't have to go and do those sorts of things. And it's a process. And then the issue of the data analysis that's putting extra pressure on people. The compliance, we've taken over the compliance and the policy and trying to alleviate all those sorts of things. The big pressures on teachers that we can't relieve are, this work that I've just outlined, and when we talked about contemporary schooling, it's much harder. It's much harder than it used to be, and that's the reality, because when you're collaborating and connected, time can get away with you, get away from you, and then we have a range of just the professional learning to support teachers doing those sorts of things. We're in the process of looking at how we respond immediately to staffing needs. For example, our staffing model used to say, where you've got 200 kids, that entitles you to 10 teachers. Well, that doesn't tell the story. What we're asking ourselves, what are the problems in that school and what staffing do they need?
What I'm asking is directly the support to the teacher and the child. More the soft skills in life. The respect, you give respect, you get respect back. That's just common knowledge, but that sort of goes out the window nowadays. We're expected to have respect but not give it. So it comes both ways. But what I'm asking, it's more them soft skills, because it's fine to take the data off the teachers and so that automatically gets done, but that interaction with children, how I just seem to see that's getting wasted. And I know that children, respect starts at home, and as adults and as parents, it's our responsibility to teach our own children to respect others and not to expect the kids to go to school and learn it. Yeah. But so it's our responsibility as parents, we take on that role, but it's more the teachers need that support, like grounds root stuff, not up in the air, get rid of technology. It's the hands-on stuff that they need support with.
Well, I believe we have programs that do with that, but it's one of the things I'm confident about, actually, that our schools do well. But you're right. The big pressure point in our schools now is parent intrusion on schools, and it's a growing problem. You read a lot about it in the media, and there's one principal in a school in Sydney went public and banned parents from involvement, but that only comes about, the building the culture, and we would hope, in Catholic schools or anything, that you would come to expect that. But I can answer it simply by saying we have programs in wellbeing and support of the staff and pastoral care. We have formation programs for our teachers, and the issue of parents is problematic. It's they're the complaints that come to me. The first thing that happens, they either write to the Pope or to the Bishop, and then it filters down to me. Maybe Monsignor Ron gets a few. But the defensiveness of parents around their children is amazing, and then they're even wanting to come onto the school premises, and the pressures are there. It's a difficult job.
Yeah, I'd echo that. It's tough. I appreciate your question. I think all teachers would, and what you said about respect and those sort of skills that we would assume, maybe come with a kid. I don't think we make those assumptions anymore. I feel like more and more, as I've sort of been a teacher, we teach those skills explicitly to kids. We don't assume that they would necessarily know it. To build that culture that we're trying to build at schools. And when you're talking about the well-being of staff, our principal, Rob Nastasi, puts a big emphasis on it, and we really try and sort of put in some programs into our school, just even in our staff room around well-being, where we'll do yoga in the morning, just an opportunity to sort of center yourself. We also do just some acts of gratitude to each other in the staff room, where we just might maybe give someone a small gift, something just to make their day a little brighter. And there's an awareness that it's a really tough job, and we need to look after the people who are doing it. Yeah, definitely. We might come back to, sorry, Greg, did you? No? We'll come back to the questions from online. So we've got Monica's question here. Are there plans to separate gifted and talented students into their own classes to give them more exposure?
Never while I'm the executive director of schools. Bundling kids, so by definition you say the more gifted and talented, what are you saying about the others? The issue is you cannot be a Catholic school and subscribe to the fact that the glory of God is the human being fully alive and gifted, no matter what capabilities and capacity, and then go down this path. I'm a very vigorous opponent to selective high schools, for example. And, the government makes its own decision about that. But again, all I can say to you is we've never had so many problems with kids and well-being because of this whole issue of how we're going about trying to fit square pegs into round holes. The other interesting part of that question is that now it's gone, I can't see it. The last part of the question, it's always about doing more. That's not the issue. And it's a problem with our curriculum. We have a curriculum that standardises learning and assumes everybody learns everything the same way. That's nonsense. I've got 3 children. I can tell you, I think they've got 3 different mothers. Like they each learn so differently, and we all sat around the same table and grew up together. Kids are different, so you need to differentiate, and that's what good teachers do. So for gifted and talented, we have programs in this school. I know, for example, we have a student who is in year 8 is doing year 11 mathematics because he wants to be a doctor. That's what the schools do. They do it within the normal range of the school life. We have programs in our schools where kids are doing step up to university and nursing and a whole range of different things. That's how you respond to them. You don't categorise them and say you're special because you're more intelligent, or the reverse is you're no good, you can't learn, so you're over here. But you don't ignore the fact that kids can do their very best. Why I don't like the current curriculum, I've gone public, I've made a submission into the New South Wales review of the curriculum, is that it dumbs down learning. What we need are the things that are going on in many of our schools around challenging tasks. You set these kids challenging tasks and they'll deliver well above what your expectation is. And we have example after example of them.
Greg, I might bring my own question in right now, because this is probably the biggest conundrum in schools, is that we are talking about doing things that are going to extend our kids into their future, and really getting them ready for a world we're often told as teachers for jobs that don't even exist, yet we're still sort of hamstrung by syllabus and by a pen and paper test at the end of year 12. How do you see schools, sort of balancing that dichotomy?
If you look at the current construct of schooling in Australia, in New South Wales, the current curriculum model and schooling model was designed in the late 1950s. It was implemented in the 1960s, and it had an exit credential. We used to have two, had a school certificate, then a high school certificate. We got rid of the school certificate. Yet in 2019, we're about to have, in a couple of months' time, 60,000 plus go into rooms and sit down for three hours with a pen and paper and write their answers. I just ask you, has the world changed in that time? Of course it's changed. But, the issue in dealing with, at least ACARA are recognising computers, and they've tried the NAPLAN online. Sure, there was a whole lot of problems, but they'll get that right. We'll be able to use computers. But, the fear that kids might cheat using the computers, all those sorts of things have to be dealt with. But the issue is that now in a visual world, everyone's complaining about kids texting. I mean, you see any child now that's writing. In fact, we do know that a lot of schools have to have practice tests in writing to get them ready for the high school certificate. Like, how silly is that? I mean, no, that's a smart move for them to do that, but it's silly that it has to happen. And the sooner we get rid of it, the better. And we are, through digital artefacts and being able to manipulate those artefacts, store them and publish them and share them and use them for stronger assessment and profiles of kids' learning.
Greg, does the Minister of Education in New South Wales federally, do they listen to people like yourself, the directors of other dioceses, the department? Do you guys get asked questions?
Well, we do have good relations with them. I'd have to say they all know me, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. And we have a pretty good record of being able to talk fully and frank. I've got having a meeting next Tuesday with one of the new ministers in the VOC Ed and higher ed space. We're lining up a meeting with Sarah Mitchell, the state one, and then Dan Tehan. I've been involved in discussions with him. Ultimately, it comes down to the politics of the day, and where I put it bluntly, I accuse the governments of lazy policy because it's just about what gets votes. Education's a hot button issue. If education doesn't press buttons, where do you go to next? Health. They're the hot button issues, and they deal with them, with whatever's going to sort of come. So, and it's a simple proposition to sell: more testing, higher entry levels, etc., etc. But the evidence shows it doesn't work.
So we trust that Greg will get our voice across for all of us. Deborah asked a really important question in how our CEDP schools are preventing bullying.
A work in progress. I certainly wouldn't claim that we're preventing bullying, but it's certainly a big issue, and it's not just amongst kids. One of the parents, one of the questions, that's right, was yours, is around this, about the deep respect. We've got to deal with it from that point of view, and it's a work in progress. We don't have a program per se, but I'm pleased to say, because we're required to be compliant, we have an anti-bullying policy. So that means we get a tick from the people who want us to be compliant. But schools, again, are left to deal with those on a daily basis.
Very fair to say that social media is making that enormously more complicated situation than it used to be. Really complex question, and a lot of work goes on in schools to look after our young people with that. Christiani asked a question about how we give our children a lifelong view of learning. Seems that there's too much focus on marks, and we're not quite celebrating, that love of learning.
I wonder if I answered that really in the question about competition. I love that question, and I think what I'd like to say in answer to the core part of the question is that we've got to switch under the industrial model of schooling. There's an inverse power relationship because the teachers control the learning, and if you don't believe that, secondary schools, primary schools to a lesser degree, but they run on timetables, and the timetable determines what you'll learn, where you'll learn, and who you'll learn it with. All right. So what we've got to do, and then the teacher is in charge. The kids are not consulted. So what we've got to do is turn the relationship. We've got it around the wrong way. So the teacher's responsible for the kids' learning. When we make the learner responsible for the learning, we'll start to really... When you take ownership, you would know yourself. You learn most powerfully when you decide to learn it for yourself, and you can explain it to someone else. And that's what we're doing in our curriculum, is trying to change that. The teacher becomes even more important in that because they have to design those learning experiences that make the possible for the learner to take responsibility for the learner, to know that you can fail and that not be judgmental, to know you can fail and you can learn. In fact, failing is about learning, and in a constructive way. But otherwise, I've answered in that other answer.
Deborah's got a good question around parent-teacher sort of interviews and parent-teacher sort of communication. Deborah's feeling like 2 5-minute meetings a year with an individual teacher is not enough. I guess what's the solution there?
This is another. I call it speed dating. Speed dating for learners. I went through it with my kids, and probably as a kid myself. But you all know what do you walk away with, and it's usually you should try harder or do more homework or something else. What I got some great examples of this in some of our schools. We took our school council, that's the advisory body for the bishop. At its last meeting, we took them to a school. We thought, since you provide advice, it'd be good for some of you they're not teachers. They come from a range of areas. And we took them to one of our new schools. And they go to the council, got off the bus and expected to go up and see the teachers. Next thing, this whole group of kids from some of age 7 or 8, some older, came and took the counsellors and then said, we're going to show you about our learning. And then spent the next 3/4 of an hour walking them through what they called their learning journey, explaining what they do, how they do it, where they've been, where they can go to next. The counsellors walked out, they were stunned. These kids just took over and explained their learning. And that's the sort of thing that's happening more and more in our schools, the conferencing type thing. Technology is going to be very helpful in this way as well, opening it up so you can get real-time answers. We're working with our data capability to build the capacity that you'll be able to have individual dashboards to see in a range of domains, what's going on with your child, and even down to attendance and enrolment patterns in real time. So that's on the drawing board, deliverable in the next year or so. But it's all to find new ways of getting that engagement so that you can know and the child can know. The biggest problem is the child doesn't know. It's usually a guessing game. How do I improve? Well, in 5 minutes, you're probably only going to be taught, they're lovely kids, or they could do harder, try harder, or stop talking to Mary, or stop looking out the window. A colleague of mine said her kindergarten child got into trouble because the teacher said, "You're always looking out the window," and the kid said, "Yeah, because you're boring." So fortunately, it wasn't one of our schools.
Deborah, I'd say too, I can only speak for myself, but any time a parent wants to have a conversation about their kids' learning, I'm up for it. I can't wait to talk to them about it. So I would urge you, if you feel like you want greater communication, to reach out to the school or to send an email. We're in way more communication with parents than we've ever been. So I think that there's probably more opportunities than just those 2 parent-teacher interviews.
Can I just add to that? You think again of the world of feedback. Everybody wants feedback. Whatever store you go in, you can either press a button, smile, or people want instant data. They want to know immediately what the experience is, so that they can improve. Right? Schools seem to operate differently, and it's time bound. And the reason you have speed dating is because school is organised around 6 hours a day, 5 days a week, for 40 weeks of the year, in subject in secondary, different in primary, but still the same, and that the time that's available is that time. Well, no other industry worries about the time. They'll find ways to get the information that they need to do better, because the game is about competition in that marketplace. And I'm not saying that we're in that same marketplace. I'm not equating education to that, but there are things we can learn about the feedback loop that we need to continuously transform what we're doing.
Diana has a question. As a parent, she doesn't send her child for private tutoring. So she's essentially hoping that the schools build up a curriculum at the beginning of each term for all the subjects, so the parents know what is expected of their student in any particular term. And it then makes it easier for the parents to get involved with their kids' learning. She knows of certain schools who are doing it at present, but not all. What's your response to that?
Exactly that. Some are doing it. We ask, at the moment, every child should know what they're expected to learn as a starting point. Stop turning this into a mystery. Sit down and guess what's going to happen to you today in this lesson. That might be the teaching style, but everybody knows, and we call it the learning intention. And then they should know how they're going to be assessed about that and how they're expected to do. And that's the part that needs to come into play. Some schools are doing it really well, others are coming to it. I'm quite confident in saying that, in our 82 schools, everybody's on that journey, and there's a continuum of where people are lying at, but they're all committed to moving in that direction.
Yeah, we definitely. I'm not sure about the way that parents understand it, but we definitely use these learning intentions. Explain to the kids before a lesson, this is what the lesson's about. This is what you will learn. We give them a success criteria, so they've got a very clear understanding of how it is that they're going to be successful. So this terminology that Greg is using, that's been sort of filtered down from the office, is definitely being used in schools, and it is definitely an aspect that has changed. I think the way that we teach. It's certainly something I wasn't doing in 1999, but something I believe strongly has a positive impact on student learning.
So can I just say, there's one of the most famous educationalists at the moment has just been in Australia recently, Sir Ken Robinson, and some of you probably he accuses schools of killing creativity. Right, that we're systematically destroying our kids' imaginations. He uses very strong language, and he mounts the case for this. So I think our staff in general understand that. It's a powerful challenge. We might have discussions about how it happens, but I'm confident that they understand the imperative to do better than we're doing, and to do it differently so that we can do it better.
All right, so that ends our internet-based questions, but hopefully we've got a few more questions from our live audience. So Mark might go around and get a couple. Just make sure you introduce yourself first, mate.
Yeah. Hello. Yeah. Mike. I've got 2 sons. One at one of your diocese schools, and one in another diocese. I just wonder whether you can give an assurance. I think most of the parents of schools under your care would send their children to the schools to get not just a good education or a superior education, but a Catholic education. can you give an assurance that under your watch there won't be any of these progressive ideas? No, I'm talking about in terms of faith. For example, like the school that was reported in the last few weeks where I think they questioned whether God was actually the father or not. And also that I've heard from a reliable source that the sex education is being reviewed. Can you shed any light on that?
Can I fix world peace first? The answer, your question deserves an answer. Yes, I can. We're in the process under our new bishop, as always happens with new bishops, reviewing our RE curriculum. I go back to the answer I gave earlier to the interview. I'm going to be on Radio National on Monday, and the person asked me, there are a whole lot of schools, and you've got Catholic schools, and they've all got good values. So can anybody be Catholic? I said no. If Jesus is missing, if the incarnation's not there, it's not Catholic, and that's the core. That's the building point. It's the incarnation, and it's the gospel message. And we will not waver from that. We will not water it down. The sacraments will remain the sacraments. All those sorts of things. I'm trying to not use words like traditional, but traditional, traditionalist, yeah. So that and the sex education thing. I think you're referring to the program that trying to roll out. I've just forgotten the name of it. Yeah, Safe Schools, yes. Where our view of this is parents are the prime educator, and our parents are the ones who will have that responsibility. We implement our PE, health and PD curriculum, which has material in it, but it's nowhere near like some of the others that are out there and that are trying to be rolled out in other schools. I'm just not up with where it is in the legislation, but certainly we have a lot of our politicians on our side who are arguing strenuously against it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, although I was told from someone within the department that the sex education in high schools is being reviewed, a new program is being implemented.
Look, I'm not across that. I don't know about the department. I do know there's been a lot of issues around safe schools, but I don't know anything about that. Within CEO? No. That's a new one to me. I'll go and find out, though.
Something for the next Chatterbox, maybe.
No, we have... we're doing a whole new rewrite. Well, it's a recasting. It's rewrite. But I'm pleased that when we say we're doing a new curriculum, we're not tearing it all apart and saying God's not in it or anymore. So I'm totally unaware, but I'll ask the question. Okay.
Does anyone else in our live audience have a question for Greg?
I've got just a question. I've got 3 boys, and they're all dyslexic. I'm dyslexic. My ex-husband's dyslexic, so I'm not very good with homework. But what I'm asking is, I've jumped through all the hoops to get my children labelled, and when they're labelled, they get all the help in the world, right? Which is wonderful, and the school supports them, and it's fantastic. But I tend to worry about all the other children that don't have a label. I believe any child that is disruptive or naughty or one of those kids that always get into trouble, they're disengaged. Okay, so we're big on trying to discipline them, but how do we engage them so they stop being naughty? So children either go that way or they go inwards, and they're the suicidal, depressive kids, which are harder to know. The naughty ones are quite good because they're easy to pinpoint. But how do we help these children? There's lots of private programs out there. There's a very good one at Macquarie University, but you have to sell your children to sort of get access to it. So how can we get, I know with these programs, are we open to get some of these experts in to help our children understand these children, get our teachers to understand these children? Because when you teach a dyslexic child, every child learns. But if you teach a logical way to a logical child, the dyslexic ones fall short. So is there anything looking further into the future where we can bring some of those experts in to help?
The simple answer is yes. We're always looking around for the support. The fastest growing area of support in our schools in terms of our budget is in the area of kids with high needs. So if you want to see the graph, it's going like that. We're getting more and more kids presenting. And I understand what you mean by labelling, but we don't talk about labelling. The schools, we have a process where schools identify. We work with the parents on enrolment, say, tell us to learn as much about your child as possible so we can start the wraparound that's needed right from the very beginning. We've strategically made a decision to put a range of units into our schools. We've just opened a new one at St Pat's at Dundas that provides high needs right and down from that, a range of support. We're trying to put another 2 in so that the north, south, east, west of the diocese at least gets coverage. So that's the path that we're on. If we can't, this goes right back to where we started. Our schools are exclusive. The bishops asked us to be at the margins, to be with those who are the marginalised and the poor, and they're the ones we have to get to equally. So your point's well made, and I've great confidence in our unit. They do the very best they can. We've got counsellors, specialised counsellors, and just by way of an example, we have one young child who's dyslexic. It's on the autism spectrum in one of our schools. He has 2 full-time teachers and a teacher aide for the one child. That's when we make that commitment, we make the commitment to you for the whole of their schooling.
I actually don't have any children in the school system anymore, but I'm in the school system. And I'm an SLSO, and even though your child may have additional needs, they still may not be funded. And the only way they can get additional help is if they're funded, if the school is funded. Now, I've been to quite a few schools, and there are quite a few kids, as I said, that haven't got a label or an additional need but still need that help. And the help needs to be in the infants, in kindergarten, year 1, year 2, because it's these kids that have got the additional needs, that have got the teacher support, do get recognised. But the ones that are quieter, as you said, that are quieter, they're the ones that are slipping under the radar and aren't getting noticed until they're in year 5 and year 6, ready to go to high school, who can't read, who can't write, and it's too late. And then they get thrown into the high school system without any of that support, and that's where the emotional problems come. So where's the support for
several
all of
things.
that?
I'm acutely aware of the funding, and if you look at our applications of funding, they're going continue to climb. Do we have enough? No, but there are rules and regulations around what you have to, the bar you have to get past to get that funding. We think we're very good at doing the best we can. We rely on that information from the schools. All our kids, 2 things happen. When let's assume you come in at kindergarten. We have a testing program, please, not like in our plan, but we have a testing program, interview with the kids so that we can begin that early assessment about literacy and numeracy and work with the parents on, the parents interview, talk to us about the child, what do we need to know about the child. So we are heavily into the early identification because we know, as you've just said, if you haven't got successful intervention by year 4, you've lost them there. So we do know that. But, I'm not crying, I'm not saying it's the government fault, blaming the government. The money that's there is the money that's there. We go into competition and, well, not competition, but we put our case. We've had increasing levels of expenditure, and then internally we do top-ups to them. Sometimes we've been accused, the Catholic sector in general, of not carrying their fair share of the load because they go to government schools. But I can tell you our policy is that once you're in, we will keep you, and we won't have a bar of stopping if you present with learning difficulty or that doesn't come into it. All those things are made, those decisions are made post the fact of your enrolment.
And that's where I think the teachers need this. When you mention that where's the support for the teachers, that's where the teachers need the support as well. Because you'll have a child with an additional need who can be disruptive, and you've got the one poor teacher in there who has to carry the whole class as well as that child, and sometimes the class needs to be evacuated because you've got a child with an additional need. Where's the support for the teacher then when the actual classroom is in lockdown within itself because of the teachers aren't getting the support?
Well, look, I can't answer the question any differently. That those things are resolved at the school level and to the best of their ability at that time. I take your comments and we will continue to strive to do better at it.
Just leading on from that, Greg, I've got 4 children. My eldest had some learning difficulties and we had to go through that process of defining. My youngest is the same, but the system's picked it up. So it comes back to good parent engagement with teachers and that conversation, talking about that early intervention and those silly questions that we asked. Tell me about your child, let me know what's happening. We didn't have to do the process, and we have a personal plan for both of those children. The other 2 do fine. So just on that, I think within the system it is, without having the understanding for parents that might think that they're not able to do or it doesn't cater for that, the system is working in schools. And then, like you said, it comes back to good teachers, identifying issues, talking and engaging with parents, and then bringing that back to if there's additional needs or additional funding, the process then gets followed. And I've actually just completed that with my youngest, and it's ongoing with my eldest, who's in high school. So I've got 2 in high school and 2 in primary school, but that wasn't the question. I just thought I'd just add that to sort of, I suppose, from a parent perspective that, you know, it is working out there. It may not be for everyone, but parent engagement is the question, I suppose. Where do you see parent engagement going where we are now, and how can we do better parent engagement, I suppose? Because I think a lot of the questions around tonight have really drawn back to that relationship between parents and schools, and you've touched on it a little bit yourself within some of your questioning. How can we do it better in the diocese? And, you know, I suppose where we go from here.
This to me is a burning issue, and it's about agency. It's about being genuine and authentic about what we say. So what we say is what we do, and it's one of the drivers behind this, trying to get to the parents more genuinely than in sort of the way it happens. So too often schools design barriers around parent engagement, and your best opportunity to have a discussions if you're in primary schools and picking up kids in the car park after school or before school, or trying to squeeze it in your busy life. Parent surveys, you know, we do tell them from me, we're genuinely trying to listen to the voice of the parents. But I think the next step is deeper engagement in the learning. But we come back to this reality about how people work. Schools have to change the way they operate to match the society in which they live, not force parents to operate in the way schools operate. And that's the real tension points. Parents who get genuinely frustrated. It's like being stuck on the end of the line. Hang on, your call is important. I'll get back to you. It's that sort of level of frustration that we keep talking about the technology. If we can find ways to do that. School being open from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m, so there's a chance you might be able to drop in and do the catch-up. We're trying to locate schools even closer to where parents, you know, socialise and do their you know, household shopping and those sorts of things. They're all things that we've got to do. We don't want to sort of hand or sort of pass the buck for the responsibility for the learning. That's what we do, and we should be doing it to the best of our ability. But we can't do this without parent engagement. You know, if we ignore the parent voice, we ignore it at our peril. Because this is where we have to be responsive. And there is, as I say, there's much to be learned. I can tell you that the secondary chatterbox we did was extraordinary. These kids are so articulate, they are so passionate, and they actually demand to be listened and heard. And the kids are saying that to us. And, you know, they're quite happy to tell you their hot button issues and, you know, what we should be doing about it. And parents deserve the same opportunity.
We might just, I apologise because I saw your hand up there, but we're finishing up for this evening. I gather that the big thing that I hope we sort of see out of here is number one, that education's really complex. It's not there's no simple answers. It's going to take real work, and these sort of discussions are really a big part of it. I'm sure you'll join me in thanking Greg for taking his time and his real openness to answer any given question that was presented to him. So really thank you for your time, Greg.
Well, I want to return the compliment. Thank you for being very gentle, but you know, very constructive. I mean, we'll look back at this and the questions, and there are things that we can follow up on it. But everybody knows where everybody knows where my workplace is. Feel free to. I was about to say where I live. I'm not giving that away. I'm not that brave. But, you know, in Parramatta, just pick up the phone and dial the office if you've got something you'd like to add, or shoot me an email. We're pretty responsive.
So thanks, everyone. Thanks to the CEDP team for all their work in getting this live streamed to an audience. And guys, when you're talking to your parents' teacher, or to your kids' teachers, be kind. They'll appreciate it. Thanks very much, everyone.